Well, it's a privilege this morning to be here with Anika Bauman, married to Andrew Bauman, whose parents, Gary and Pat, are very old friends of mine. In fact, going back to the 1970s, Pat and Gary. But today we're here to talk about Anika's book, Becoming Neighbours. And Anika and I have a bit of affinity with our interest in refugees. My work back in the 1980s when Reagan was bombing Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, I was involved with the Canadian sanctuary movement, Americans too, that would smuggle refugees up into Canada through the States. And then I was on staff with Amnesty in the 1980s, and we did a lot of work with refugees, particularly from Central America, where it was most intense at that particular time. And then we had at the Amnesty office in Vancouver an organization called VAST, Vancouver Association for Survivors of Torture. So there's a continuity here with what Anika has been doing recently, and that going back for me in the 1980s, 1990s with refugees and immigration. So, but we're not here to talk about myself. We're here to talk about Anika's journey. So first of all, maybe talk a little bit your journey to Kinbrace, which you worked with for from 2017 to 2020, and then we'll get into the book, the 5 values, and where next on the journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's nice to just, I think, hear a bit about your background, and in that I hear this continuity of that was the 70s and 80s, and then this is my story of being at Kinbrace, but it's this long journey and there's continuity there. But for myself, I came to Kinbrace, which is a housing community for refugee claimants in East Vancouver. I came there through sort of the path that my studies took. Like I started out in international studies, international development at Simon Fraser University. And my choice to do that was really motivated by working internationally. I had traveled a bit before, and international development sort of intrigued me. But then I was part of this summer learning experience in Vancouver's downtown Eastside, and through that I was introduced to Kinbrace, and it was sort of this eye-opener of, oh, there's opportunities right here to be rubbing shoulders with people from different cultures. And so at that point there was like a new openness in me to maybe staying here and finding work with some kind of community like Kinbrace would be for me. So I finished my degree. I went and lived in France for a year and taught English there, and then had no idea what I would do next. And this idea came to reach out to Kinbrace, this community I'd learned about. And it just happened that there was a position that was open to live in the community as a host. So part of the host community, the permanent people who live on site and offer welcome to newcomers. So that was a pretty easy yes for me at that point, and I came directly back from France and was picked up and went to Kinbrace and spent 3.5 years there. So,
well, tell us a little bit about what is Kinbrace, what does the word mean, and then how did the organization start, and then we'll get into your book, Becoming Neighbours, and the important 5 values that are embodied in that. So maybe a little, what is Kinbrace?
Yeah, so the word is a little bit curious, Kinbrace. I think there is a town in Scotland called Kinbrace, but this, the name of the organization was invented out of the 2 words kinship and embrace. And it began in 1998 actually, so it's been around for quite a while. And it was birthed out of the Grandview Church in East Vancouver. And I think I wasn't part of the community at that time, but there was this question coming up of how could we meet the practical needs in our neighborhood? How could we be the church in our neighborhood? And this one couple, Tama Ward and Lauren Belisky, they had noticed a need for housing for newcomers, and so through multiple partnerships they were able to start Kinbrace. So Kinbrace offers both housing and settlement support to people who have just arrived in Canada. And that's typically for the first 3 to 6 months, offering housing and then support finding permanent housing in the Vancouver area.
So important, isn't it, when you have people coming from really fleeing political, economic, repression, ecological, to often totally disoriented when they get to a new country, and to have someone who welcomes them and makes them feel at home as much as possible. So let's move into your book then, Becoming Neighbours. And Becoming Neighbours, you've got five key values here, Kinbrace's core values as they're called: welcome, trust, mutual transformation, celebration, and prayer. Why don't we just go through each of them? So welcome, let's reflect on that.
Yeah, so the description for welcome is: we are in solidarity, bearing witness to exile, we live with refugee claimants. So I think this speaks to the specific model of the Kinbrace community. It's not just a building with multiple units of housing for newcomers. It's a place where Canadians or permanent residents and newcomers live together. And so there's actually quite a high ratio of hosts to refugee claimants. Like there's 3 units for hosts and I believe 6 units for refugee claimants. So this idea that our extension of welcome is something that isn't just a right that me as a Canadian I hold, but something that we extend together as we create a home and a community together.
So important. And trust is the second. Certainly people fleeing a difficult situation, it takes time to build trust, doesn't it? Because trust, like a Ming vase, once broken, can be easily destroyed. And who can you trust anymore? It's a hard one. So what second one is trust in terms of the Kinbrace core values?
Yeah, I find trust a really interesting one because there's so much suspicion that's in the air when we're talking about refugees and newcomers, and a lot of questions of like, are they legit, or where have they come from, or are they trying to take our jobs, or these kind of I think we carry some fear, and so trust is really something that like comes counter to that suspicion that can be in us. And interesting thing at Kinbrace is trust is something that is extended both ways as well. Like someone who's just arrived in Canada and doesn't know me, doesn't know the staff at Kinbrace, it's a huge step of trust to say, yes, I'm going to come live in this community. And likewise, I often don't know much at all about someone new who's arriving, so there's trust there too. But one practice in the Kinbrace community is, rather than needing to ask those questions of a person of like, where did you come from, why did you flee, there's a conscious choice to not ask those questions and instead let relationships develop more organically, like a relationship would between you and I, rather than like, what's your most traumatizing experience? Tell me all about it. Like that's not usually where we start out. So yeah, I think it's about remembering that we're human and starting there.
Yeah, so foundational, isn't it? Our basic humanness that transcends where we've come from. Third one then, mutual transformation. So this builds on welcome and then trust, and then you're sort of putting in foundation stones of a healthy, mature community. So what would be mutual transformation? Yeah,
so mutual transformation is that idea that like I'm not there as a helper or a service provider. The relationship isn't just a one-way relationship, but there's giving and receiving that happens in both directions. And I think it really, at the core of that value of mutual transformation is genuine listening. That's where these relationships grow. That's where there's openness to how might I be changed by this person. And yeah, that's where there's growth that can happen. But I've found that there's a lot that can also get in the way of that. Like there's a lot that's pushing against that mutuality in relationships. I often felt quite aware of being a white woman with Canadian citizenship, actually dual citizenship, and knowing English fluently, having knowledge of all the systems in Canada, and that's a lot of privilege. And so when looking for mutuality in relationship, like how do I be aware of that and make space for this other person who might have very little knowledge of English or of Canada and the systems here? And so it's a challenging one.
Oh, absolutely. It's a tightrope, you know. And celebration, sometimes people coming from suffering and war, tragedy, the danger is that celebration can appear sometimes a bit superficial and saying, no, how does, in the midst of suffering and tragedy, what's the relationship of recognizing where a person's come from, but not allowing oneself to slip into pity or the tragic experience, but there is place to celebrate and move forward in life and living with that tension. So celebration, how does that fit into the welcome, trust, mutual transformation?
Yeah, I think it does kind of flow from those first three of like I think for me celebration became not so much about exactly like what we're celebrating, but the people in my midst and who we're celebrating. And so I think out of that there's all of these even like kind of mundane daily celebrations that can happen, like something like a first day of school, or someone getting their work permit, and then bigger celebrations like there's an annual Thanksgiving event that Kinbrace has done for many years, and but it's a tricky one because I think there is like the backdrop is really trauma and tragedy and leaving everything behind, and sometimes I think I can get weighed down by all of that more than my neighbors at Kinbrace. Like I remember one mother and daughter who had just arrived, and they kind of like drew me into this little birthday party celebration for her. The mom went out and got donuts from Tim Hortons, and I grabbed some candles, and there we were. Like it just sort of happens.
Spontaneous celebration, so important, isn't it? Planned yet spontaneous, that sort of little rays of light in the midst of often painful darkness of the past, but finding forward into the light of life and celebrating those moments. So prayer would be the fifth one then. Why is prayer important, and how did people understand prayer within the Kinbrace community?
Yeah, I can say that there's many different understandings of what prayer means and what prayer looks like within the community. Many of the staff who work at Kinbrace are Christians, but most of the residents, I would say, aren't. Most come from Muslim backgrounds. So I think in light of that, there's really this mystery that we have to hold prayer with. And I think for me, that place of prayer is really where I find myself rooted in a shared identity with refugee claimants. This idea that like none of us are really home, or we're all sojourners in some way, and we're brothers and sisters. We're people who are traveling together. So I think even that idea of mutuality and welcome and trust, all of that is rooted in this shared identity that I think comes from prayer.
Certainly a deeper level of interfaith dialogue when you get Muslims and Christians and people from other faith backgrounds.
And not just a way of intellectually thinking about it, but okay, when I'm in a situation with this Muslim woman who's having her refugee hearing tomorrow, and how do we, what do we do in this situation? Or being asked, like, what is prayer for you? And then being able to ask her, and what is prayer for you? So, I found it really quite rich.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it certainly deepens the understanding of the mystery of prayer, doesn't it? The ambiguity of it. Yes. Yeah. So the Kinbrace's core values then: welcome, trust, mutual transformation, celebration, and prayer. What's the next step in the journey for you, as much as you can understand it anyway?
Yeah, so about a year ago, I moved out of the Kinbrace community. I had lived there for 3.5 years. And I ended up meeting someone, Andrew, and we got married, and that was what motivated the move from Kinbrace for me. But it's kind of interesting. I was reflecting as I was coming here, like, there's all this talk about welcoming the stranger, and but I mean, marriage, like, that seems like the ultimate kind of loving the stranger, welcoming the stranger, this person who is completely other, and learning that way of love. And so I can feel sometimes like I've left Kinbrace and I'm no longer that connected to the community, but at the same time I think all of these values still apply.
Yeah, they have a perennial depth, don't they, that transcend community, place, time. And as you say, in marriage, as you get to know the other, particularly at a deeper level, there's a stranger welcoming into your soul, and how you knit souls together on that journey. And that itself is a pilgrimage of ever deeper drawing closer together.
Interestingly, I'm no longer doing this work with refugees or newcomers, but my husband Andrew is. So I've sort of handed the baton to him, and I've been doing more like illustration related work. So at least right now.
Well, that may be a good way to end it. Becoming Neighbours is Anika's book. Exquisite, simple, attractive, evocative drawings, but the actual writing itself accessible. It draws you right into the story of what it means to welcome refugees, what it means to live with them, what it means to embody, incarnate these values. And certainly encourage one and all, if possible, to buy this little primer. It's packed with insights in terms of what it means to live in community and to embody perennial values. So thank you, Anika, for joining us, and may this book take wings and fly wisely and well.
Thank you.